The abandoned wife sat frozen at the family dinner table as her husband's mistress leaned forward and spat directly onto her face, the warm saliva sliding down her cheek while his mother threw her head back in cruel laughter. What none of them knew, not the husband who had walked out 6 months ago, not the mistress who now wore his ring, not the mother-in-law who had always called her worthless, was that the company where he climbed corporate ladders and boasted about his rising career had just been inherited by the very woman they were humiliating. The wife he abandoned now owned every desk, every contract, every paycheck, including his own, and she had discovered this life-altering truth only hours before arriving at this dinner. As the mistress's spit dripped onto the white tablecloth and his mother's laughter echoed through the private dining room, the abandoned wife reached for her napkin with hands that trembled not from shame, but from the devastating power she was about to unleash. Would the husband who abandoned her survive what came next? Could the mistress who spat on her face possibly understand the magnitude of her mistake? Would his mother who laughed at her humiliation ever smile again after learning the truth? And what would the wife who inherited the company her husband worked for do with the absolute control she now possessed over all their futures? Victoria Hayes had always thought of herself as unremarkable. At 34, she had spent the last decade making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, less visible to fit into the life her husband wanted. The corporate wife, the grateful wife, the wife who never complained when Ryan came home late or not at all. The night he left 6 months ago still played in her mind like a film she couldn't stop rewatching. "I'm done, Victoria," Ryan had said, his Louis Vuitton duffel already packed. "I'm 42 years old, and I refuse to spend another day in a marriage that suffocates me." She had stood in their kitchen, the kitchen she'd renovated with her own inheritance money from her grandmother, and asked the question that now made her stomach turn with its pathetic desperation. "Is there someone else?" Ryan's laugh had been cold. "Does it matter? You've already checked out of this marriage. You've been checked out for years." The gaslighting had been so smooth she'd almost believed it. Almost convinced herself that her exhaustion from managing their home, supporting his career moves, and swallowing her own ambitions had been abandonment rather than sacrifice. 3 weeks after he left, she'd seen the photos on social media. Ryan with Amber Castellano, 26, blonde and stunning in that Instagram filter way that made Victoria feel ancient. Amber worked in marketing at Garrison Technologies, the same company where Ryan had recently been promoted to Senior Vice President of Operations. Victoria had inherited more than her grandmother's money. She'd inherited the woman's spine too, though it had taken her months to remember it was there. The dinner invitation had come from Ryan's mother, Patricia Hayes, a woman who had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment and wielded disappointment like a weapon. "Family dinner," the text had read. "Ryan wants to introduce us to someone special. I think it's time we all move forward." Victoria had stared at that message for 20 minutes before responding with a simple, "I'll be there." What Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Victoria had received her own life-altering message that morning. The call had come from Martin Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore & Associates. "Ms. Hayes, I'm calling regarding your uncle's estate, Gerald Morrison's estate." Victoria had barely known her Uncle Gerald. Her mother's brother had been the black sheep of the family, eccentric, reclusive, and extraordinarily successful in ways no one discussed at family gatherings. He'd made his fortune in tech investments in the 90s, then disappeared into a life of privacy and philanthropy. "I wasn't aware he'd passed," Victoria had said softly. 3 weeks ago, I'm afraid. His instructions were very specific. The reading of the will took place yesterday, and Ms. Hayes, you are the primary beneficiary." The words that followed had rewritten her reality. Gerald Morrison had owned a controlling interest, 51%, in Garrison Technologies. The company had been one of his earliest investments, purchased when it was a struggling startup 30 years ago. He'd remained a silent partner, never interfering, simply collecting dividends and watching his investment grow into a billion-dollar corporation. And now it belonged to Victoria. "The transition is effective immediately," Martin had explained. "The board has been notified. Your uncle was quite clear in his wishes. He wanted the shares to go to someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated." Victoria had sat in her small apartment, the place she'd moved to after Ryan took the house, and laughed until tears ran down her face. Then she'd called Martin back. "I want complete confidentiality," she'd said. "No announcements. No press releases. Not yet." "As you wish, Ms. Hayes. Though I should mention that your husband," ex-husband, she'd corrected, "works at Garrison Technologies. In senior management, I believe." "I know," Victoria had said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "I know exactly where he works." Now walking into Marcello's, the Italian restaurant where Patricia had made reservations, Victoria felt the weight of that knowledge settling over her like armor. The private dining room was exactly what she expected. Patricia at the head of the table, perfectly coiffed and dripping with jewelry that Ryan's late father had bought her. Ryan beside her, looking confident and relaxed in a way he never had during their marriage. And Amber, stunning Amber with her youth and her tight dress and her hand possessively on Ryan's arm. "Victoria," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she'd found something unpleasant on her shoe. "How surprising that you actually came." "You invited me," Victoria said simply, taking her seat across from Ryan and Amber. "We thought you should hear it from us," Ryan said, and Victoria noted the "we" with bitter amusement. "Amber and I are engaged. We're planning a spring wedding." 6 months. He'd wasted 6 months after 13 years of marriage before proposing to someone else. "Congratulations," Victoria said, and meant it. "Let him marry Amber. Let him think he'd won." "That's it?" Amber leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "No tears, no drama?" Victoria met her gaze steadily. "What would you like me to say?" "Maybe acknowledge what a relief this must be for Ryan," Patricia interjected, her wineglass already half empty. 13 years with someone so passionless, so ordinary. "I told him years ago he'd married beneath himself." The words should have hurt. A year ago, 6 months ago, they would have shattered her. Victoria had spent years trying to earn Patricia's approval, bending herself into shapes that never quite fit. "Did you?" Victoria asked calmly. How fortunate that he listened. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Let's not do this. We're here to move forward, not rehash the past." "The past," Amber said, her voice taking on a cruel edge. "You mean when Victoria was playing housewife while Ryan was actually building something? While he was becoming someone important?" Victoria took a sip of her water. "Ryan always was ambitious. At Garrison Technologies, he's a legend," Amber continued, warming to her subject. "Everyone knows he's going to be CEO someday. We're already looking at houses in the estates. Real houses, not those pathetic little apartments some people settle for." The dig was obvious. Victoria had told Ryan about her new apartment during one of their stilted phone conversations about dividing assets. "The estates are lovely," Victoria agreed. Patricia laughed, that high, sharp sound Victoria had learned to dread during family dinners past. "You're taking this remarkably well. I suppose when you have nothing to lose, there's no point in fighting." "Mother," Ryan said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "What?" "It's true. You left her with practically nothing after she'd already squandered her grandmother's inheritance on that ridiculous house renovation. Now she's living in some cramped apartment. Working at that," Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "That little non-profit job." "What do you do again, Victoria? Something with literacy?" "Adult education programs," Victoria said, "helping people earn their GEDs." "How charitable," Amber said, and the word dripped with condescension. "Of course, some people are suited for charity work. When you can't compete in the real world, I suppose helping those less fortunate makes you feel important." Victoria felt the old instinct rise, to defend herself, to explain that her work mattered, that teaching a 50-year-old woman to read so she could help her grandchildren with homework was worth more than any corporate title. But she swallowed the words. Let them think what they wanted, for a few more minutes. "Garrison Technologies is the real world," Ryan said, his voice taking on the lecturing tone Victoria remembered from arguments about money, about her career choices, about everything she'd ever wanted that didn't serve his ambitions. "We're revolutionizing cloud infrastructure. My division alone brought in $200 million last quarter. That's the kind of success that changes lives." "I imagine it does," Victoria said quietly. The food arrived, osso buco for Ryan, sea bass for Amber, and chicken piccata for Patricia, who was already on her third glass of wine. Victoria had ordered a simple pasta, appetite lost somewhere between the engagement announcement and Amber's casual cruelty. Victoria, Patricia said, her words starting to slur slightly, I hope you understand this isn't personal. Ryan deserves happiness. He deserves a partner who can match his ambition, who can stand beside him as he rises. You were adequate for who he was in his 20s. But people grow. They do, Victoria agreed. I mean, look at you, Patricia continued, gesturing with her wine glass. Still wearing those sad little outfits, still driving that ancient Honda, still pretending your little teaching job is meaningful work. Can you blame Ryan for wanting more? Amber laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Maybe if you tried harder, taken care of yourself, made yourself interesting. Victoria felt her hands trembling in her lap, not from humiliation, from the sheer effort of maintaining her composure when what she wanted was to unleash the truth that would destroy them all. Not yet. Not quite yet. I'm sorry I wasn't what Ryan needed, she said, and watched him shift uncomfortably. Don't apologize, Ryan said. We're both better off now. You can focus on your charity work. I can focus on my career. It's better this way. Much better, Amber agreed. Then she did something Victoria would replay in her mind for years to come. She leaned across the table, her eyes locked on Victoria's, and spat directly into her face. The warm saliva hit Victoria's cheek and slid slowly downward, leaving a trail that seemed to burn. The dining room went silent except for Patricia's sharp, delighted laughter. Oh my God, Patricia gasped between laughs. Oh my God, Amber, that was... She couldn't finish, dissolved into hysterics. Ryan sat frozen, his face cycling through shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been satisfaction. Amber sat back, looking triumphant. That's what I think of pathetic little women who can't let go. You came here hoping for what? That we'd take pity on you? That Ryan would remember some ancient affection? You're nothing, Victoria. You've always been nothing. Victoria reached for her napkin with trembling hands. She wiped her face slowly, deliberately. While Patricia's laughter echoed off the walls and Ryan watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you done? Victoria asked quietly. Done? Amber smiled. Honey, I'm just getting started. You need to understand your place. Ryan is mine now. This life is mine. And you work at Garrison Technologies, Victoria interrupted. In marketing. Is that right? Amber blinked, thrown by the change in subject. Yes, why? And Ryan, you're Senior Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO, correct? What's your point? Ryan asked warily. Victoria placed her napkin on the table. Her hands had stopped trembling. My point is that as of 9 o'clock this morning, I became the majority shareholder of Garrison Technologies. 51%. Controlling interest. Which means that while you've been sitting here celebrating your engagement and your success and my failure, you've actually been employed by me, both of you, for the last 8 hours. The silence that fell was profound. Patricia's laughter cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Amber's mouth fell open. Ryan's face drained of color. That's not possible, Ryan said finally. Victoria pulled out her phone and opened her email. She turned the screen toward them, showing the message from Martin Whitmore with its attachment. Official documentation of share transfer, board notification, and her new position as majority shareholder. My uncle Gerald Morrison passed away 3 weeks ago. His 51% stake in Garrison Technologies came to me. The transition was effective immediately. The board knows. The CEO knows. Everyone knows except apparently the employees in this room. Gerald Morrison, Ryan whispered. The silent partner. That was your uncle? My mother's brother. We weren't close, but he was clear about his wishes. He wanted someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated. Victoria looked at Amber. Someone pathetic. Someone who couldn't compete in the real world. Amber had gone pale beneath her makeup. You can't. I can, Victoria said softly. I own controlling interest in your company. I can do whatever I want. Patricia tried to recover. This is absurd. You can't possibly think... I think, Victoria interrupted, her voice cutting through Patricia's bluster like a knife, that I've spent the last 6 months being told I'm nothing, being made to feel small, being abandoned by a man who promised to love me, mocked by his mother who promised I was family, and just now assaulted by his mistress in a public restaurant. It was just spit, Amber said weakly. It was assault, Victoria corrected. But I'm not going to press charges. I'm going to do something far more devastating. Ryan found his voice. Victoria, we can talk about this. Whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking about the performance review coming up next month. Your review, Ryan, the one that determines whether you keep your position. I'm thinking about the marketing department restructure that's been proposed, the one that could eliminate several positions, including potentially Amber's. You wouldn't, Amber breathed. Why wouldn't I? I'm nothing, remember, ordinary, beneath your notice. People like me don't matter in the real world of business and success. Victoria stood, gathering her purse. Except now I control the real world you're so proud of. Every decision, every promotion, every termination, they all flow through me now. This is blackmail, Patricia hissed. No, Victoria said calmly. This is consequence. You've spent years teaching me that I don't matter, that my work is meaningless, that I'm forgettable and ordinary and beneath you. Well, congratulations. You've taught me very well. Now I'm going to be as forgettable and ordinary as you've always said, except I'll be making those judgments from the majority shareholder's seat. Ryan stood abruptly. We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything to me, Victoria said, and for the first time, let him hear the pain beneath her composure. Everything, Ryan. I loved you. I sacrificed for you. I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. And you left me because I wasn't interesting enough, because I wasn't ambitious enough, because I worked with the poor instead of making millions. So no, what we had doesn't mean anything anymore. You made sure of that. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Amber, you'll want to clean your resume. I'm told there are positions available in the nonprofit sector. The pay is terrible, but some people find it meaningful. Consider it a recommendation from someone who understands charity work. Victoria walked out of Marcello's into the cool evening air. Behind her, she could hear raised voices, Ryan and Amber arguing, Patricia shrieking something about lawyers. Let them argue. Let them panic. Let them feel what she'd felt for 6 months. Powerless, abandoned, and certain their world was ending. Her phone buzzed. Martin Whitmore. Ms. Hayes, the board would like to schedule a meeting for Monday morning. They'd like to discuss your vision for the company going forward. Monday works, Victoria said. And Martin, I'll need a full report on all senior management, performance reviews, complaints, everything. Including Mr. Hayes? Especially Mr. Hayes. She ended the call and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere in a hospital across town, a woman she'd taught to read last month was recovering from surgery, her children able to understand the medical forms because their mother could finally decipher them. Somewhere in a community center, men and women were working toward their GEDs, changing their futures one hard-won lesson at a time. That was meaningful work. That was real success. But tonight Victoria would allow herself this moment, this trembling, devastating moment of watching her abandoned husband realize he'd thrown away the woman who now controlled his future. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. We'll fight this. Amber, clearly. Victoria smiled and typed back. I look forward to it. My lawyers are excellent. They have to be. I own 51% of $1 billion company. She walked to her ancient Honda, the one Amber had mocked, and drove home to her cramped apartment. Tomorrow she would figure out what kind of majority shareholder she wanted to be, whether she would be merciful or ruthless, whether she would fire them all or simply let them twist in fear. But tonight, Victoria Hayes allowed herself to feel powerful, vindicated, and finally free from the need to be anything other than exactly who she was, the wife he abandoned, the woman who inherited his world, and the person who would decide whether his mistress's spit had cost them everything they'd spent years building. In the morning, the real work would begin. 3 months later, Victoria stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office on the 42nd floor of Garrison Technologies, watching the city spread out below her, like a kingdom she hadn't known she'd inherited. The office had belonged to Gerald Morrison, though he'd rarely used it. The desk was mahogany, the chairs Italian leather, and the view stretched from the financial district to the harbor. It still didn't feel entirely real. What felt real was the stack of reports on her desk. Performance reviews, departmental assessments, the future of 230 employees distilled into spreadsheets and analytics, including Ryan and Amber. The board meeting that first Monday had been brutal. 12 men and 3 women, all decades older than Victoria, all skeptical of the nonprofit worker who'd suddenly become their majority shareholder. Ms. Hayes, Harrison Chen, the CEO, had said carefully, "We understand this transition is unexpected. We're prepared to offer you several options for your shares. Buyout packages, consulting arrangements." "No," Victoria had said simply. "I'm sorry? No, I'm not selling. I'm not consulting. I'm keeping my shares, and I'm taking an active role in company decisions." The silence had been deafening. "With all due respect," Jennifer Walsh, the CFO, had ventured, "you have no experience in cloud infrastructure?" "Correct, which is why I'm hiring consultants. What I do have experience in is identifying talent, managing limited resources, and understanding what motivates people to do their best work. I've run education programs with budgets smaller than what this company spends on coffee, and I've changed lives with them. Imagine what I can do with actual resources." She'd spent that first week doing nothing but listening, sitting in on meetings, reviewing financials, learning the business her uncle had believed in enough to invest 30 years ago. And yes, reviewing the files on Ryan Michael Hayes and Amber Castellano. Ryan's performance reviews were exemplary. He was brilliant at operations, ruthless with efficiency, and respected by his team. He'd grown Garrison's operations division by 30% in 2 years. By every objective measure, he was an asset to the company. Amber's file was more complicated. She was talented. Victoria could admit that. Her marketing campaigns had increased brand recognition significantly. But there were complaints too. 3 formal HR reports about workplace bullying, 2 about inappropriate behavior at company events. Nothing severe enough to warrant termination, but enough to paint a picture of someone who wielded her youth and looks like weapons. Victoria had agonized over what to do. The temptation to fire them both had been overwhelming, to exercise the power they'd mocked her for not having. To make them feel the helplessness she'd felt, but revenge, she'd discovered, was more complicated than she'd imagined. A knock on her office door pulled her from her thoughts. "Ms. Hayes, they're ready for you." Victoria turned from the window and picked up her files. Today was the day. 3 months of careful consideration had led to this moment. The conference room was silent when she entered. Ryan sat at the far end of the table, his face carefully neutral. Beside him, Amber looked defiant, her arms crossed. Harrison Chen sat at Victoria's right hand, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," Victoria began, taking her seat. "I know the last 3 months have been uncertain for everyone. I've taken time to review operations, meet with department heads, and assess where Garrison Technologies stands and where it needs to go." She opened the first folder. "Ryan, your performance numbers are exceptional. Your division is the most profitable in the company. Your team's retention rate is the highest we have." Ryan's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "Thank you. Which is why I'm not firing you," Victoria continued. "But I am making changes. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to our Singapore office as Vice President of Asia Pacific Operations. It's a lateral move in title but comes with a 20% salary increase. Singapore's market is expanding rapidly, and we need someone with your skills to oversee that growth." The color drained from Ryan's face. "Singapore? It's a 2-year contract, renewable based on performance. Housing and relocation expenses are covered. You'll report directly to Harrison." Victoria kept her voice level, professional. "It's an incredible opportunity. Most people would consider it a promotion." "Most people aren't being exiled to the other side of the world," Ryan said quietly. "Exiled?" Victoria met his eyes. "You told me once that your career was everything. that I held you back from opportunities because I wasn't ambitious enough. Singapore is opportunity. Unless you're saying your career isn't actually everything? Ryan said nothing. What could he say? Refusing would mean quitting, losing everything. Accepting meant leaving behind the life he'd built with Amber, the house in the estates, his mother's weekly dinners. I'll need your answer by Friday, Victoria said. HR will send you the contract details. She turned to the second folder. Amber, your situation is more complicated. Amber's defiance cracked slightly. I know you want me gone. What I want is irrelevant, Victoria said. What's relevant is the 3 HR complaints filed against you in the past 18 months. Harassment, creating a hostile work environment, using personal relationships to gain professional advantages. Those were documented, investigated, and found to have merit, even if the actions weren't severe enough for termination. Victoria slid the file across the table. However, I've also reviewed your campaign work. You're talented, genuinely talented, which is why I'm offering you a choice. Amber stared at her. What choice? Option 1. You're terminated. I provide a standard severance package and a neutral reference. You find work elsewhere. Start fresh. Option 2. You transfer to our Chicago office. Different role, different team, account management instead of creative direction. It's a step down in prestige, but comes with opportunities for growth if you can demonstrate professional behavior. You'll be on probation for 6 months. Any HR complaints during that time, and you're done. Chicago, Amber whispered. Or unemployment, Victoria said simply. Your choice. You have until Friday as well. Harrison Chen cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, if I may, these decisions will be seen as personal. Of course they will, Victoria agreed, but they're also defensible. Ryan's transfer addresses a genuine business need in Asia Pacific. Amber's situation addresses documented HR concerns while giving her a chance to salvage her career. Any board member who questions these decisions will find themselves reviewing very thorough documentation. She stood. That's all. Ryan, Amber, you can go. Harrison, if you could stay for a moment. Ryan and Amber left without speaking, their faces shell-shocked. Victoria waited until the door closed before turning to Harrison. You think I'm making a mistake, she said. I think you're walking a fine line, Harrison corrected. But I also think you've been more thorough in 3 months than some board members are in 3 years. You're learning, quickly. I had a good teacher. Victoria smiled slightly. Gerald's notes were comprehensive. Her uncle had left her more than shares. He'd left journals, observations, letters explaining why he'd remained silent for 30 years, why he'd believed in this company, why he'd chosen Victoria. Because you know what it means to be underestimated, his final letter had read, and you'll never underestimate anyone else. That's what makes a good leader, Victoria. Not ruthlessness, not brilliance, empathy. Understanding that everyone, even the people who hurt you, is fighting battles you can't see. Harrison, Victoria said carefully, do you think I'm being too lenient? I think you're being strategic, he replied. You could have destroyed them, fired them publicly, made an example. Instead, you're giving them chances while protecting the company. That takes more strength than revenge. After he left, Victoria returned to the windows. Below, the city continued its endless rhythm. People rushing to jobs, to homes, to lives that intersected and diverged in patterns too complex to fully understand. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Hayes. I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed my son's life. Victoria didn't respond. She'd blocked Patricia's number after the 7th voicemail, each one more vitriolic than the last. But occasionally a text slipped through before the system caught up. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll prove myself in Chicago. Tonight. Victoria stared at that message for a long moment. Amber accepting the transfer, choosing growth over pride. A third text from Ryan's number. I'll take Singapore, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. I didn't see what I had until it was gone. Victoria's finger hovered over the reply button. A year ago, 6 months ago, those words would have meant everything. The validation she'd craved, the apology she'd deserved. Now they felt hollow, too late, motivated by fear rather than genuine remorse. She deleted the message without responding. The nonprofit called while she was reviewing quarterly projections. Janet from the Adult Education Center, her voice warm. Victoria, we miss you. Any chance you're coming back? I don't know, Victoria admitted. I'm trying to figure out how to balance both. The company needs me, but so does the center. The students ask about you every week, especially Maria. She finished her GED last month, scored in the 95th percentile. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Maria, the 52-year-old woman who'd been illiterate until last year, who'd cried the first time she read a bedtime story to her grandson. That's incredible. She wants to go to community college now, study nursing. She says you showed her it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. After the call ended, Victoria sat in her expensive office chair and cried. For Maria, for herself, for the version of Victoria Hayes who'd believed she was ordinary because extraordinary people had convinced her she was small. She made a decision then. Called Martin Whitmore. Martin, I want to establish a foundation. Corporate philanthropy through Garrison Technologies. Focus on adult education, workforce development, literacy programs. How much are you thinking? 10 million to start, annually. Martin's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's significant. That's necessary, Victoria corrected. I want people like Maria to have resources. I want the work I did at the nonprofit to scale. I want Garrison Technologies to be known for more than cloud infrastructure. The board will approve it, Victoria said firmly, because I own 51% and because it's tax-deductible corporate giving that will improve our public image. Draw up the paperwork. That evening, Victoria returned to her apartment. She still hadn't moved, despite being able to afford anything in the city. She ordered Thai food, changed into sweatpants, and sat on her second-hand couch reviewing foundation proposals. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Victoria Hayes? A woman's voice, professional. This is Dr. Rebecca Thornton from Stanford Business School. I'm calling about an opportunity we think might interest you. Victoria listened as Dr. Thornton explained. A case study. A real-time analysis of her transition from nonprofit worker to majority shareholder. They wanted to document her approach, her decisions, her leadership style. We're particularly interested in how you balance personal relationships with business decisions, Dr. Thornton said. The way you've handled what could have been a revenge scenario with strategic professionalism. It's exactly the kind of ethical leadership we want to teach. I don't know if I'm qualified to teach anyone anything, Victoria said honestly. That's exactly why you're qualified. You're still learning, still questioning, still aware of your limitations. That's rare at your level. Victoria agreed to think about it. After the call ended, she sat in the darkness of her apartment, processing everything. 3 months ago, she'd walked out of a restaurant with spit on her face and rage in her heart. Today, she'd made decisions that would alter multiple lives, including her own. She'd chosen strategy over revenge, growth over destruction, possibility over punishment. Ryan would go to Singapore. Maybe he'd thrive there. Maybe he'd realize what he'd lost. Maybe he'd build a new life and become a better version of himself. Amber would go to Chicago. Maybe she'd learn empathy. Maybe she'd fail spectacularly. Maybe she'd surprise everyone, including herself. Patricia would continue to hate her. That was inevitable. And Victoria? Victoria would continue learning how to be powerful without being cruel. How to lead without losing herself. How to honor the woman who taught adult education classes while becoming the woman who ran a billion-dollar company. She pulled out her laptop and began writing. Not business plans or strategic analyses, but a letter to Maria. Dear Maria, she typed, Janet told me about your GED. I'm so proud of you. You asked me once if I thought it was too late for you to become someone new. I didn't have a good answer then. But I do now. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. We're both learning that together. Love, Victoria. She hit send and closed her laptop. Outside, the city glittered with lights. Billions of stories intersecting, diverging, connecting in ways no one could predict. Wives abandoned and finding themselves. Husbands losing what they took for granted. Mistresses learning that cruelty has consequences. Mothers watching their children face the results of their own actions. And in a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, A woman who'd inherited more than a company sat in the darkness and smiled. Not because she'd won, though she had. Not because they'd lost, though they had. But because she'd discovered something more valuable than revenge or vindication or power. She'd discovered who she was when no one was making her smaller. And that woman, that ordinary, extraordinary, devastatingly powerful woman, was just beginning to understand what she was capable of becoming. The abandoned wife had inherited the company. What she did with it would be her own story to write, and it had only just begun.